Freedom, man. That's what it's all about. You've got to groove on freedom, like the good book says.
Welcome. You are listening to What on Earth is Happening. This show will discuss the topics of human consciousness, mind control, natural law, the occult, and all issues that affect the freedom of the people of Earth. What on Earth is Happening will endeavor to shine light upon the darkness of our world and to offer empowering solutions to the problems we face as humanity approaches its critical moment of choice. And now, here is your host, Mark Passio.
Welcome one and all, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Republic Broadcasting. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. The network's website, republicbroadcasting.org. Today is Saturday, July 19th, 2014. This show is live right here on RBN every Saturday evening from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9 p.m. to midnight Central Time. We have a great show lined up for you here tonight. We are going to continue, of course, the Cosmic Abandonment presentation in its extended format. I'm going to be talking about the connection between the interference theory of human origins, as I term it, to the current human social and psychological condition. That's what we'll be getting into, as we have been for the past several weeks, and we will be probably for the next several weeks on What on Earth is Happening. I will be taking your calls in hour number 3 tonight. So for anyone who's interested in getting into the call queue, I'll give the call-in number here at the top of the show. The call-in number to join us on What on Earth is Happening, 800-313-9443. Once again, the call-in number to join us in hour number 3, 800-313-9443. I have just one quick event announcement. I'm going to be giving a big all-day seminar called Demystifying the Occult on Saturday, October 4th, 2014. An all-day seminar from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Manchester History Center at 175 Pine Street in Manchester, Connecticut. The zip code is 06040. Here's the description of the seminar. Mark Passio, the no-nonsense teacher of streetwise spirituality, will take his guests on a journey of exploration, examining the world of the occult and its symbols. What exactly is the occult? Why should you know about it? What kind of knowledge comprises the occult? Who possesses such knowledge, and how do they use it? How is occultism different from mysticism? What can the secret language of symbolism communicate? How is symbolism being used in our everyday lives? These are the themes and topics I'll be exploring in this all-day seminar in Connecticut this October, and I will be getting into, in the second half of the seminar, some of the symbolism of the major arcana of the tarot as a case study of occult symbolism. Advance tickets for this all-day seminar, only a $25 donation. To order advance tickets, you can send a check or money order payable to Arthur Capozzi, that's C-A-P-O-Z-Z-I, at 500 Monroe Turnpike, Suite 142 in Monroe, Connecticut, M-O-N-R-O-E, Monroe, Connecticut, 06468. At the door tickets, a $30 cash donation if you choose to get your tickets at the door on the day of the event. Once again, Saturday, October 4th, 2014, all-day seminar, Demystifying the Occult in Manchester, Connecticut. Hope to see you there. So that's the only event announcement I have for today. I'll jump right into the material. I want to direct everyone's attention, as always, to the whatonearthishappening.com radio show page, where during the live broadcast, there are always images for tonight's show listed in numerical format. You can click on the numbers to bring up that slide. During the presentation tonight, I'll try to do my best to always make sure that as I move on to a new slide, I tell you the image number so you know what number slide to click on to bring up the slide that I'm talking about in a little slideshow format on the website. When the show is not live, of course, these images are always posted with the podcast. Tonight's show will be podcast number 163. Okay, so last week we ended on slide number 86, I believe, or if we had moved slightly further from there, I'm not exactly positive. I believe it was slide 86. That's where I'm going to pick up from tonight. So we were talking about the megalithic sites throughout the world and how human technology could not actually duplicate much of the ancient stoneworks, the megalithic building that has been these structures that have been built in pretty much just about every culture on the earth, on every continent. And these sites are often upwards of over 10 or 12,000 years old, and in some cases even older than that. And they are built in a way that modern humans would not even think of building or choose to build. And again, in most of the cases, we could not duplicate the building structure, the building technique with modern technology that we have available at our disposal today. Slide number 86, we were talking about Sacsayhuaman in Peru. And it's a temple complex with some of the stones there reaching weights of almost 200 tons. You could see a huge megalithic block in the image in slide number 86 there to the right of that child. And you could see the completely unique architectural building style that was done with these stones, almost as if they are somehow morphed or melted into position, where they're not cut as blocks, but they are just have very irregular shape and are so tightly fitting that you could not insert a human hair in between these stones. They fit so perfectly together in all dimensions. And it's just something that we would be very hard-pressed to duplicate today. And when archaeologists and anthropologists are asked, well, why did they choose such a building style? They say to make it earthquake-proof. And I really don't personally buy that as an argument. That may be one of the side effects or side benefits of building with this style. But I think it was they built this way because the technology that they were using actually afforded them to basically take the stones and just make them fit up against each other in irregular shapes like this, because I feel that they were using some kind of molecular technology to actually melt stone, okay, to actually make it supple and be able to be formed literally like clay almost. And so they didn't do cutting with this type of a technique, as far as I'm concerned. These stones don't even look like they're machined in many cases, as you see machining techniques on other sites, which we're going to look at a example of clear machining when we get to slide number 90, Pumapunku in Bolivia. But to go back to Sacsayhuaman, we were talking about more famous sites like the Great Pyramids of Giza, of the Giza Plateau in Egypt, just outside of Cairo, where some of the largest stones in the foundation are upwards of 400 tons. And in the structure, you have some stones that are 50-ton blocks, like the stones that are above the King's Chamber. whereas most of the stones are probably around 2 to 4 tons in the Great Pyramid. You have ones that are 50 tons in the structure, and you have ones at the very level foundation that weigh in at around 400 tons. We will pick up this discussion on the other side of this break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We'll be right back.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Republic Broadcasting. I'm your host, Mark Passio. Tonight we're talking about Cosmic Abandonment, a presentation that I gave back in December of 2013, talking about the connection between the interference theory of human origins, or in other words, the origin of humanity, as directed by non-human entities that came to this planet thousands of years ago, in connection with the current human condition, socially, psychologically, spiritually. And we're talking about how a lot of the structures that have been discovered from the ancient past really can't be duplicated by modern technology. And, we looked at last week some of the more prominent of these megalithic structures, like the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Stonehenge monument in southern England, Machu Picchu in Peru, and we were talking about Sacsayhuaman in Peru, outside of Machu Picchu, where some of these stones look as if they are somehow molded into place like clay. It's really amazing. I've never been there myself, but it's someplace I would hope to visit at some point. To just look at this amazing construction. If we move on to slide number 87, we'll see an unfinished block. It may be a finished block, but it's an unused block essentially. This is just outside of the Baalbek site in Lebanon, and we'll be talking about Baalbek in a couple more slides. But this block doesn't look like it was ever put into place. It was probably being quarried or moved, and it was abandoned here for some reason, maybe because it had maybe some type of a structural defect. But you could clearly see a machining line on the front end of the image, just in front of the gentleman who's standing on this monstrous block that weighs it's estimated to weigh over 2,000 tons. Now, 2,000 tons, that's 2,000 times 2,000 pounds. That's 4 million pounds that this block is estimated to weigh. I mean, first of all, who would even think of cutting out a 4 million pound block? Okay, why would it have to be a single stone? Because there's something regarding the kind of technology that they are using that has resonance with large amounts of stone that is intact and not broken into smaller amounts of stone. They wanted to use megalithic stones for a particular reason regarding resonance and energy. And I can't tell you what that exactly is, but it just makes so much more sense. Why would they go through the immense trouble of keeping a single stone intact and moving it across distance to place it into place? And when we look at Baalbek, we'll see that there are stones at Baalbek that are almost this large. I mean, some of the stones at Baalbek are estimated to be over 1,200 tons or 1,400 tons. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's an amazing place, and they say it was built by the Romans. The Romans the Roman Empire moved blocks this large when we couldn't do it with our largest cranes today. Just to erect a temple to their god, one of their Olympian gods. So it's just none of the classical explanations by modern archaeologists and anthropologists really hold any water, because they never really explain not only how they did this, but why. Why would you see everywhere else they didn't build with techniques such as this? Why at these particular locations? Because they didn't really do it. They didn't do this. They used what was already there and built a temple on top of it, which you can clearly see has completely different architectural construction techniques. That is not in this megalithic style. They were using what's already there and building on top of it. So, because this is the site that was given to them by their gods, that they worshipped as gods in the ancient past and the more distant ancient past, and then they just use those to venerate those gods and build right on top of it. So the next slide number 88, is of the Osirian temple in Egypt. And this temple is erected to the solar deity Osiris, one of the creator gods in the ancient Egyptian pantheon of gods. And again, you can see in this image, and you'll once you start to study this topic, you'll see this kind of theme play out over and over and over again when you study some of these ancient construction, megalithic construction sites and building techniques. You'll see a layering effect always, where the largest stones, not just because of weight purposes, but because they're the oldest thing that's there. They're at the lowest geological area. Okay, they're at the oldest level of building. Okay, are the heaviest and largest stones built in the megalithic style, and then on top of that, at a much later date, newer stones are placed, and they're always much smaller, okay, much more numerous because they're smaller, okay, and they're always built with less precision, more space between them, often with mortaring techniques of some kind instead of the mortarless construction that you see in the megalithic sites, the ancient megalithic sites. And I would suggest this is because there are not only different building techniques, they are different builders. They are not the same builders as these older architectural sites. So here we clearly see it in the Osirian temple. You could see the largest blocks at the base of this structure at the very bottom, and in this place that is now essentially an aquifer of some kind, or like there's water flooded into this temple. Some of these blocks weighed upwards of 60 tons in some cases, or estimated to be approximately 60-ton megalithic blocks. There's also, at this particular temple, I don't think you could see it too clearly in this image, maybe if you bring the brightness or contrast up, but I'm not even sure if it's taken at this angle where you can see it. There is some sort of an etching that is burnt at an atomic level into one of the blocks, and it is a sacred geometrical pattern known as the flower of life. Again, it would suggest that there's some type of resonance or underlying energetics that have to do with these blocks, and the reason that they were constructed out of single pieces of often very hard stones like granite to somehow provide some sort of an energetic resonance field. Okay, so the flower of life is actually laser etched. I don't even want to say laser. It may be some other type of technology, but it's burned into the atomic structure of the rock at the Osirian temple, and it's not painted or burnt with any kind of a chemical mechanism. It doesn't seem. It's actually at an atomic level. You know, if you go into the rock, it's burnt even into a depth within the rock. Okay, so it's an interesting phenomenon to look at this particular temple. But going back to my point about the different layers of construction, you can see on top you have much smaller stones that are built on top of the older construction at a second level. And clearly they weren't made with the same level of precision and are often, not still standing, and they have been affected by time and weathering and earthquakes, etc. And then on top of those, you even see a newer layer of construction where there's much smaller stones fitted into place, often by mortar, construction technique. Okay, so you'll see this over and over again, actually, as you look into this field of ancient megalithic architecture. We'll pick this topic up on the other side of this break. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening?
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah.
And we're back. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. Tonight we're continuing the extended version of the Cosmic Abandonment presentation. It's all about the connection between the interference theory of human origins and the current human condition. We're looking at megalithic sites and how, in many cases, we can't duplicate the technology of the ancient past, even today, with all of the modern technological advancements that humans have achieved. We were on slide number 88 talking about the Osirian Temple and the Flower of Life sacred geometrical pattern that is quote-unquote laser etched into the atomic structure of the rock at that temple. And we were talking about the layering effect that you often see when studying the megalithic construction sites, that you'll see the largest megalithic and oldest megalithic construction techniques that are mortarless at the bottom, often built on top of by another culture that came along after the original civilization that had built the original site had been long gone, and built on top of it with smaller construction that was less stable and sometimes used mortar, but more likely than not still used a mortarless construction technique, but clearly not as advanced and not capable of moving such large stones into place. And then usually on top of that, by thousands of years later, a later civilization comes along and builds on top of that with a much less refined technique, usually using mortar to hold the stones together. So you'll see this repeated over and over endlessly as you kind of study this entire field. Let's move on to slide number 89. And this is the Temple of Jupiter, as they call it, from the Roman Empire times. But before that, it was known as Baalbek. That's Baalbek. And Baalbek is, of course, was a site that was built to the god Baal. Baal was an ancient Canaanite deity, an ancient Phoenician Canaan deity. And, this site is, of course, in Lebanon, in the Middle East. And, the largest stones here are upwards of 1,400 tons. Just absolutely unbelievably massive blocks, okay? And archaeologists would have us to believe that the Roman Empire put those blocks into place with the technology that they had available to them at the time for no other reason than to make a flood wall barrier, okay? It's absolute absurdity, okay? Completely absurd to think that the Romans, okay, would have had technologies that we would not be able to place these stones with this kind of precision today. No way. And yet they would expect us to believe that the ancient Roman Empire was able to do this. Okay? And again, for no other reason, their ostensible reason is it was a slurry wall of some kind. It was there to hold back flood waters. And, some of the explanations get more and more absurd and ridiculous as archaeologists try to stretch their hypotheses to give an explanation to people who are demanding an explanation for how could this be? How could this even be here when we can't do this today? And again, you're going to see the technique once again repeated over and over. You can clearly see 3 levels of construction here. You have the large, supermassive megalithic construction of the very ancient world, followed by a smaller level of megalithic construction, and then finally you have stones built on top of that are much smaller. And you'll see this layering over and over and over again, as I said, as you study this entire phenomenon. So this is Baalbek, again, largest stone here, estimated to weigh over 1,400 tons. Moving on to slide number 90, and this is the last example that I'll give, but perhaps one of the most unique and least well-known and most amazing ancient megalithic sites. And I would say this is the site that has the absolute clearest example of machining. And I'm only giving one image here to illustrate the machining technique because I thought this was a good one. But I'm telling you, there are so many more amazing sites when you type this site into any search engine that you want to look it up on the internet. Look up Puma Punku. That's P-U-M-A-P-U-N-K-U. P-U-M-A-P-U-N-K-U. Puma Punku. Okay? This is in Bolivia. And this site, okay, has probably the clearest example of ancient machining out of any megalithic site in the world. These stones are so clearly and obviously machined that a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old could probably tell that these stones were machined. And yet archaeologists and anthropologists insist, no, these stones are cut with ancient copper tools, Neolithic style era tools, okay, Bronze Age and Neolithic and Bronze Age style tools. I mean, it's so ridiculous, it's laughable, and yet they would have people believe this, that you're going to cut stones that are 6 times the hardness of the tools you're working with. Yeah, you'll make a lot of progress that way, I guarantee you. But yet this is what classical archaeology expects people to accept as an explanation. Just because they can't abandon the linear theory of progression of civilizations that they have ascribed to, that they have completely bought into and, wholesale accepted as the explanation for how modern civilizations have come to be and have formed over time. Because looking at a site like this, you clearly have to accept that there was ancient technology. And that means that there was electricity, that there was metallurgy, that there was a knowledge of physics, that there was a knowledge of engineering. And it didn't evolve in a linear progression. We had access to this, or at least someone had access to this in the very distant past, and then it disappeared somehow. And they don't want us asking those questions of, well, who had this technology? How was it brought here? Did it evolve, or was it brought here by someone else? Who were those people? What were they like? Why were they here? They don't want us asking, well, what happened? Because they don't want us to know the real story of the ancient human past, because that's empowering knowledge about how the current state of humanity came to be the way that it is, which is what this presentation is all about. And once you understand the how and the why of how it came to be the way that it is, that puts you in an empowered position to do something about the way that it is. Because knowledge is never disempowering, it's always empowering. Now, if you look up some of these, first of all, this shot is just an absolutely amazing example of clear machining in the ancient past. These stones are clearly not carved. Anyone who looks at that and says those stones are carved and not machined, I feel sorry for you. I'm not even going to attempt to somehow scientifically refute that contention that these are carved stones and not machined stones. If you can just look at that with common sense, okay, just with your own eyes, and not be able to tell those stones are machined, I feel sorry for you as a human being. And you could say that's an ad hominem attack, that's some kind of a logical fallacy, because I'm saying that, I just feel sorry for anybody that can't see the truth about that just by looking at it with their eyes. I don't really care what you want to claim, how you want to claim I'm wording it or putting a spin on it, okay? It's called general common sense as an adult human being, which most people aren't. I realize that most people aren't adult human beings, regardless of their biological age. They're psychologically a child, okay? But all I have to say is anybody that would tell me that this is carved architecture, not machined architecture, I would just look at them and say, feel sorry for, the psychological condition that you're in. That's what I would do, and I wouldn't even try to argue with them, okay? Now, first of all, not only this image is so clear that it's machining that, like I said, you could ask a 3-year-old in nursery school and they would be able to tell you, of course, that's not something that's carved, that's something that's cut, okay? But if you look up Puma Punku on the internet and just get some images, even if you just go to something like Google Images or something like that and just look for images of the site, you'll see there are blocks with drilling holes in them that literally have clear examples of drill holes done with large drill bore type technology drilled through it, and yet archaeologists would still try to blow smoke up people's rear ends and tell them this was somehow done with some type of a punch tool or some type of a carving tool. We'll pick this up right there. We'll be right back, folks. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We're continuing with the cosmic abandonment presentation. We were on slide number 90, which is an image of Puma Punku in Bolivia. And we were talking about how this site is a clear example of machining technology used in the ancient world. Some of the slabs that you see at the center of this image are upwards of 130 tons, or estimated to be around 130 tons. I highly recommend people read more about Puma Punku and check out some of the clear examples of machining and drilling of the stones there. Clearly, machined, dremeled, drilled stones. It's just absolutely amazing. All out there, right out in the open, hidden in plain sight, so to speak. And of course, once again, let me just reiterate, this has all been debunked to death. The so-called experts and the so-called skeptics and debunkers, we'll talk about these people later on in this presentation. It's been debunked endlessly, and given the most utterly ridiculous explanations, all to have to avoid talking about the very real and clear implications of non-human involvement with our species, because these people just have a religion that they don't want to accept that we could have been involved with, in any capacity, with intelligences that are beyond our understanding. Okay, and that's all it is. It's called fear. Plain and simple, period. All right? These people will invent things that are completely absurd to just try to take the focus of people's attention away from that general hypothesis, to not ever even consider it. And it's part of this whole scientism ideology that human beings are the apex of all life, that there's nothing beyond us, that there's no higher power, that there's no civilization that could possibly be beyond us, that no one has ever been here except us. We're the be-all and end-all of everything. The idea that man is God, that, we have done everything that is here, that we need to look no further, for any explanation as to what has ever occurred on this planet except human beings themselves. And, I understand not everything is done by extraterrestrial beings or creatures, and every single thing that is anomalous, we shouldn't immediately jump to that hypothesis to try to explain it. I'm not saying that either. Okay, some people do that. But when we're talking about technologies like this that we really can't duplicate today in many cases, or would be very hard pressed to duplicate even with our level of technology today, certainly some which we would not be able to, like Baalbek or the Great Pyramids, etc., or Sacsayhuaman. You have to start looking toward an alternative explanation or hypothesis to try to explain what are we actually witnessing here and how did it come about if human beings did not do it. Okay, but some people, they'll just never, ever, ever ask those questions, or never even attempt to even look at that as an explanation because of the fear involved with the implication, okay, of it possibly being non-human in origin. I just want to say in this section, there is a gentleman I highly, highly recommend, and when I made the presentation, I didn't really include him in the researcher section, but I'm actually going to maybe go back and try to link to some of his work with some of the former podcasts, especially the one that I did last week on the elongated skulls. But he's done really brilliant work on a lot of the megalithic architecture as well, and his name is Brian Forrester. Okay, so I really highly recommend that people check out Brian Forrester's work. And you could check out YouTube videos. I'll try to link some of them with this podcast. And like I said, I may go back and link some other researchers' work to the topics that from when I started the Cosmic Abandonment presentation as a podcast series on What on Earth is Happening radio show. So I've really not been putting too much work into doing extra linking of videos and books and things like that on the podcast series, but I am going to go back and fill that in at some point. Just really have been so busy with some other projects that I've been working on, and I really haven't had time to get to that, but I'm going to do that as I promised previously, to link a lot of researchers' material with this. So I want it to come together as kind of a cohesive thing where it's all there and you can go and click on it and do the research. But if you follow the presentation and you type in these names into any search engine of your choice, it's a never-ending field of research. I mean, you could be there researching any one of these topics for years. Okay, so just wanted to mention Brian Forrester's work because I think it really resonates with me, and it really helped to fill in a lot of the blanks, so to speak, in this puzzle. So I really highly recommend him. So let's move on to another one of my favorite researchers, and that's Lloyd Pye. If we move to image number 91, again, this whole section that I call the story of our present, okay, is attempting to explain a lot of the anomalies that we see that classical science has not really fully explained how certain things came about. So, we were talking about ancient structures and artifacts, and now we're going to get into some flaws in Darwinian theory and human genetic defects, that we see that are present in the current human genome. And also, this is going to tie into the origin of primary psychopathy. Or at least I'm tying it into the origin of primary psychopathy. I'm not saying Lloyd Pye did that, but he did postulate the idea that a lot of the genetic manipulation that was talked about in the ancient texts that we've already briefly covered, we'll cover in even more detail later on, may explain a lot of the genetic anomalies and defects that we see in the human genome today. And I agree with that hypothesis, and I've postulated that perhaps it is also responsible for the presence of the complete lack of empathy that we find in less than 1% of the human population in what is known as primary psychopathy. We'll get to that as we move through the section, but essentially this central section here in this part 2, which is the story of the present, again attempting to explain anomalies about the human condition through looking at the ancient world. Okay, this central section here is all about Lloyd Pye's work, and I'll probably spend the larger part of the duration of today's lecture component, talking about Lloyd Pye and his work. So slide number 91 through 94, these slides are entitled Lloyd Pye's 12 Ways Humans Are Not Primates. He put this forward, I believe it was in his video series, Everything You Know Is Wrong. It could have possibly been hominids or hominoids as well. I'm not sure which video it was, but I will also link some of the videos that Lloyd Pye has out there on YouTube, because a lot of people are not familiar with this researcher, and it's a real sad thing that more people are not. I'll tell you just a real brief anecdotal story. I even attend some UFO discussion groups in the Philadelphia area, and oftentimes when I even go to some of these groups, people are not familiar with Lloyd Pye and his work. And I say this is one of the central researchers in this entire field of connection to non-human intelligence that people really need to become familiar with and really deeply look into all of his work. Not just some of it, all of it. Okay? Not only the material on the Star Child skull, which is very fascinating and very supportive of this entire theory, okay? But you really have to look at his work on our genetic manipulation, because that's the real focus of his work, of the intent of these beings that were here with us and what they actually did to the human species, okay? And how, this punches tons of holes in Darwinian theory and exposes it really as the religion that it is, okay? Just like creationism, we've gone through this whole dialectic between creationism and Darwinian quote-unquote evolutionary theory before on past shows. And again, I subscribe to neither one of those worldviews, because they're both imbalanced worldviews that are essentially based in belief, not the actual real evidence, okay? So and we'll talk about that, because that could sound like a real wild claim to some people, that there's no evidence for Darwinian evolution, okay? But most people don't understand. This is essentially postulated like a religion in the scientific world, all right? There's no actual evidence in the fossil record for species transitioning into other species. As Darwin said, there would have to be for his theory to really hold up and hold any water. And yet these transitional species, their fossils have never been discovered. We'll pick this part up on the other side of the break. Stay with us, folks. Welcome back, everyone. We're into the second hour of tonight's broadcast. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. We're going through the Cosmic Abandonment presentation in an extended format. We were on slide number 91 and beginning to go into the section regarding the researcher Lloyd Pye's explanation about ways that human beings are actually not primates, as Darwinian theory postulates and as most people believe that we are. And as we move through these, I'll give a couple of images off to the side of this list to illustrate what Lloyd is talking about. And again, you really have to go and see his online lectures. If you look up his name in YouTube, you'll definitely come across most of them. The three main ones are An Evening with Lloyd Pye, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and Hominids or Hominoids. If you look up those three videos, you're going to get the bulk of the important material of Lloyd Pye's work. Of course, he's done a ton of brilliant research regarding what is known as the Star Child skull, an anomalous skull that was discovered in Mexico in the early part of the 1900s that came into Lloyd Pye's possession, and he did some genetic testing of it and testing of the bone, proving that clearly it is something that is real and that is not something that is fully human. It has some human genetics in it, but it also has some non-human genetics, suggesting that it is some type of a hybrid being. So that's what Lloyd is mostly known for, is the Star Child skull, but really his even more important contribution to the ufology field in general, I would say the human origins field, is his information about the ancient human past and how human beings came to be in the situation that they are in now. So let's look at this section called Lloyd Pye's 12 Ways Humans Are Not Primates. Number 1, human bones are much thinner and lighter than primate bones. So right here in this image on the left, you see two comparisons between human bones and primate bones. You see a finger bone of a primate on the very, very left-hand side of the image in the inset image, with the two bones being held on the person's hands on their fingers. And then you see a human finger bone, which is so much thinner and absolutely less dense than a primate bone. You see a femur bone, which is the major part of the leg, the upper leg or thigh bone, okay, on the right-hand side of this image. And you could just see drastically the difference between the density of the bone. Okay, a human being's leg bone is just much more hollow and has less density of bone. It's much lighter. The overall construction of the bone is just weaker, and in many ways, many people would say that is a inferior design to the original primate. And if evolution is supposed to improve on design, it would seem like it didn't do a very good job in this. And so some people will say, well, that increases speed, you know. And yeah, that's one thing, but really, strength and overall durability is so weakened, and that becomes a being that is actually much frailer and less strong, much weaker than a primate. That's why you would not want to get into one-on-one, hand-to-hand scuffle with any kind of a primate, because more likely than not, you will lose big. Okay, they're so strong they can actually tear you limb from limb, literally tear you apart. And I'm not saying that figuratively. I mean literally rip your limbs apart. Because that's how strong their musculature is, and their bones, and then the connective tissue and the ligaments, and between those bones, just it's unbelievable strength that they possess. So, people look at them as just, in many cases, herbivores and creatures that just, aren't very dangerous, when in fact primates are some of the most dangerous animals when it comes to if you got in a confrontation with them as a human being. So the bones are not even in the same class, and we will in a later slide look at how there are absolutely zero bones in the human skeleton that are shared with any primate that has ever been discovered. Zero. There's no same bone, no transition where there is a half human, half primate with any of the same bones at all, ever discovered, and no archaeologist or anthropologist will even debate that. Okay? And if anybody has any archaeologists or anthropologists that would even debate that, then they should bring the evidence forward and show it. There is zero bones that have ever been discovered that are shared between a human and a primate. No transitional species, not even one bone in a transitional skeleton ever unearthed. And you know what? There probably never will be, because as we're going to show through this presentation and through Lloyd Pye's work, I feel clearly shows human beings aren't primates, and we didn't come from this so-called common ancestor and then turn into a new species. There may be genetic material from the primate in the type of species that we are, And I feel that it is mixed with yet another type of DNA that came from elsewhere to create who we are. So I think we are a hybrid of a primate and another species, hence a completely different species with no shared bones. Okay, no real true a common ancestry, because it's a disconnect from that earlier lineage. I'm not saying that perhaps over vast swaths of time, primates may turn into more advanced forms of a primate being and eventually evolve to become something more than what they are now. But I don't think that's what happened in the case of human beings, personally. Okay? So let's move on to the next point in this 12-point of the ways that human beings are not primates as put forward by WOEIH. The muscles of a human being are 5 to 10 times weaker. Well, of course, if you have bones and connective tissues and ligaments and joints and cartilage, etc., that are all essentially much less dense and weaker than in a human being, the muscles are also going to be weaker because that's what's connecting to those bones. Musculature is going to be a reflection of what type of bones really they're going over. And, of course, human beings can work their musculature and build it up as well to become somewhat stronger, but you're never going to arrive at the inherent, innate strength of a primate. Okay, so we're all weaker than primates, essentially. 5 to 10 times weaker, as he's saying in many cases. Human skin is not well adapted to direct sunlight. And, I'll go beyond this and say human beings aren't well adapted to planet Earth, period. Not only to direct sunlight to the type of star that our planet orbits, but we're not suited to the entire outdoor aspects of nature. Okay, which is why we developed clothing and sheltering and domiciles, houses, etc., and other technologies to keep us sheltered from the elements, whereas many other animals do not need to do that. They can survive in the wild. They can survive out in the open. So he's saying that our skin is not well adapted to direct sunlight. We burn easily, whereas primates do not. We'll continue this list on the other side of the break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening. Stay with us.
Code of silence that we don't dare speak. There's a wall between us and a river so deep. We keep pretending that there's nothing wrong. There's a code of silence and it can't go on.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Republic Broadcasting. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. We're making our way once again through the Cosmic Abandonment presentation, and we were on slide number 91, WOEIH's 12 Ways Human Beings Are Not Primates. And we were on the third part of these 12 points, that human skin is not well adapted to direct sunlight, and I made the point that really the human being really isn't well adapted to planet Earth, period. Okay, whereas primates most certainly are and can live out in the wild fairly easily. Let's move on to the next point. Human beings have up to 10 times as much adipose tissue or body fat, essentially, than primates. Primates are much leaner than human beings and they don't have a mechanism in them that activates a lot of fat storage as human beings do. This would indicate that our body chemistry and metabolisms are so drastically different that there's not really much in common there at all. So we have 10 times as much fat storage fatty tissue storage as primates do. Point number 5, human beings have drastically less body hair, one of the most easily observable physical aspects when we look at these two species. And the patterns of hair, the hair patterns are reversed in human beings as they are in primates. For an example, in the human male, hair will grow on the chest, the front part of the human male. In many cases, it will grow on the back, not nearly as thick or dense as on the front of a human male, but a primate is reversed. The hair is very, very dense throughout the entire primate, particularly on their back, and then in many cases the chest is bare or largely devoid of hair. So overall, human beings have drastically less body hair, much less dense patterns of body hair, and the hair patterns are reversed in almost all the cases with a human being versus a primate. Point number 6, the head hair and nails must be trimmed. Okay, so hair and nails on a primate really don't ever grow longer and longer and longer as the being lives. This would suggest that's a completely different genetic mechanism at work in the primate than in the human being. There's examples of people don't trim their nails, they could become literally over a foot long or more in some cases. And hair, of course, will grow and grow and grow as well. Not indefinitely, but up to a point. And whereas primates don't need that kind of trimming done, their hair will just not grow any longer. It's like basically the coat on a dog. Okay, so that's point number 6. Point 7. The skulls and brains are completely different. I'm going to take a little bit of time on this point to go to slide number 92, where all the same text points, bullet points are listed, but the image was changed here in the presentation to be a representation of a 3 different hominoid type creatures. We have like the Australopithecines, and then we move up to a later hominoid that is allegedly an ancestor of human beings, and then we go to modern Homo sapiens on the right. And Pi, in his presentations, constantly shows people that when you line the skulls up like this, it becomes like a sight factor. It looks good, and it looks like it makes sense, and I could see they're similar, and then it's changing from one form to another. Of course, this is a technique that's used by Darwinian evolutionists to postulate and put forward their theory that we came from or descended from in some way the common ape or hominoid ancestor. Okay, but what Pi is actually saying is that there's very little similarity between these skulls. Okay, there's a huge jump to go from an Australopithecine skull to, for example, a Neanderthal skull or later a hominoid skull, and then there's just as big of a jump to go from something like that up to a modern human being. And you could see the ridges around the eyes, the brow ridges and the sloping forehead. There is no forehead, I'm sorry, the sloping skull that just goes right back to the cranial case, okay? And the plates of the brain casing, the skull casing. So there's these complete lack of a forehead. You see the protruding teeth. The teeth, the jaw comes out and away from the skull, so much more pronounced in the hominids than in a human being. You see that the face is set back, well back from the teeth, and it's underneath this huge. The eye sockets are underneath these huge brow ridges that aren't present on a modern human being. The jaw is completely different. There's really not much of a chin on the primates, where there's a pronounced chin on a human skull. Okay, the eye sockets are different. The brain case itself is completely different, a different shape, obviously a much different size. If you really look at all the different aspects of it, there's really not many similarities. They may look visually along certain lines similar, but when you actually compare them, they're very drastically different. And that's what he's saying here in this point, that the skulls and brain are completely different. Mostly we're talking about also size of the brain. When you compare the size of a modern human brain to the so-called ancestors of humanity, their brain was much smaller. So that's what this slide basically is alluding to here, that the people who try to support the hypothesis of Darwinian evolution often arrange skulls like this to basically make it visually look like it's plausible that one species evolved into another. But the main thing to keep in mind here connects with slide number 94, which we'll get to in a moment, that there has never been one single bone shared found in a transitional species or skeleton that has been unearthed from the fossil record between any of these earlier hominid creatures and a modern human being. Not one. And this is what Darwin himself, when putting forward his own theory, told people that would have to be discovered and borne out in the fossil record for the theory to hold any weight. That there would have to be transitional species with shared elements, shared bones, and not one has ever been discovered. And this would suggest that for this theory to be true, all of that change would have had to happen in practically an overnight sense, or while we find intact skeletons of some of these species, somehow we just can't locate the skeletons of these transitional species. And I understand the difficulties in the fossilization of bones and how rare fossils actually are. But if an entire species were to be formed from an earlier one, we would have found transitional species in the fossil record by now. We'll pick this up from right there when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening? Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Republic Broadcasting. We were talking about the 12 ways, as listed by Lloyd Pye in some of his presentations, that human beings are not primates. And we were on point number, I believe it was 7, that the skulls and brains are completely different. And we looked at this technique that archaeologists and anthropologists use to get people to buy into the evolutionary paradigm, the Darwinian evolutionary, quote-unquote evolutionary paradigm. I have to remember always to wrap that in double quotes, because it is nothing of the kind. It isn't real evolutionary progression according to natural law. It is scientism ideology, essentially, and the ideology that evolution is nothing but the progression of genetic material, the survival of genetic material, which has nothing to do with real, which has a very small part to play in real evolution, but it is not what real evolution is actually about, which we got into on past shows. I won't reiterate that today. If you want my take on what real evolutionary progression in nature is about, then you could go pull up those past shows that we did on that topic. But this is a technique that is often used by Darwinists as like a religion. Like literally they are the followers of this theory religiously, because that's what this is. It's a religion. Make no mistake about it. Okay? Just like it's no different than creationism. It's just on the opposite side of the extremity. Creationism postulates God created everything and made everything the way that it is. And Darwinists say, no, it was all just random mutations in nature and it has nothing, there's no intelligence that underlies it. The intervention theory, or as I call it, the interference theory, postulates that it's kind of like a mixture between the two. There was a natural evolutionary progression, but then something of intelligence hijacked it from that path and turned it into something that it was not really intended to be. And that's what this entire theory is all about. Okay, that's what I call interference theory of human origins. That we were developing naturally at some point in our ancient past, perhaps in harmony with this planet and perhaps living on this planet in a way that was well adapted to it, and then something else came along, as all the ancient scriptures tell us happened. We were basically involved with some other form of intelligence that essentially took us out of that natural state of progression and molded us to their liking through genetic manipulation. Okay, through a hybridization process, and hence that's why you see a lot of these anomalous skulls that are half human and half something else that science cannot yet identify. So, just going back to the point that putting the skulls together in a progression like this is part of Darwinists' technique to try to get people to think that the theory is reasonable and it's all figured out. And we just know that it is this way because it links this in their mind, saying, well, that sounds reasonable, but when you really look closer, there's so many there's so many differences between these skulls that they are so hard pressed to explain them, that all the differences and where those came from and why there are no transitional fossils between those states. So it's just a very clever technique that they use, which looks reasonable to people glancing at it cursorily. But if they don't do any further research, of course, they just accept it on face value. So that's his 7th point, and we'll move on to the next one, which also we can move to slide number 93 to explore that a little bit further in depth. This point is point number 8, and it's that human beings have drastically different locomotion than primates. And this is largely because of the design of the foot overall. And Pi goes into this pretty extensively, and I think it's some of the best evidence that human beings are based on a completely different design than the primates. And it is a not as efficient of a design when it comes to operating normally on this planet. It is actually a disadvantage. What we call, so-called positive differences or quote-unquote upgrades to the human form over the primate form are actually disadvantages, not advantages, which you would expect evolution to, if Darwinian evolutionary theory were correct, you would expect it to produce a better design, not a more flawed one. Well, there's probably no better example of this than the design of the human foot structure, the foot bones. A primate's foot essentially is designed directly over its center of mass, and when it comes down almost flat with a perfect weight distribution. Human beings come down on the heel and then put the weight toward the side of the foot, okay? And it goes around the arch. The weight distribution goes around the arch and then has to curve drastically to then come back onto the ball of the foot. And then it then goes forward across the big toe, which we largely use for balance, okay, and for walking. All right, so this is a completely inefficient design that has to curve the weight distribution of the being around the ball of the foot when walking. And what that also does is it puts a lot more torque on the bones, the muscles, the joints, the cartilage, etc., which is why so many people develop like knee problems, especially in their later years. So this is a absolute regressed design from a primate, which comes down with a very even distribution of weight from the heel moving forward through the center line of the foot and then off of all the toes, essentially in a very even pattern and even progression of weight distribution. So the human foot is probably what you can consider a backwards design or a regression from the primate foot. And I would suggest that is more likely because of the infusion of non-human DNA that we received. Perhaps the method of locomotion or the way that these beings walk is advantageous to them in the environment where they come from, and they had a foot that was maybe more drastically different than the human and primate foot. But this is a mixture or a blend between the two. And in that, it creates something that is obviously much less efficient than the primate foot and the primate method of locomotion. Again, I'm just explaining this, in a cursory way here in this presentation, but if you watch Pi's videos, he goes into it pretty in depth and has a lot more slides when it comes to this. Again, this presentation, you have to understand, was part of a 2-hour I had to give all of this in 2 hours. I'm extending it here over multiple radio shows. Okay, I had at the venue that I did this presentation at originally 2 hours to go through all this material, the entire presentation. I had to blast through it at like light speed and just hit people with this and then move on. Very, very quickly without lengthy explanation. Because, it was, cram as much information about how human beings' origins is not what we're told, and how it was related with non-human entities that didn't really care about us, wanted to control us, basically created us as slaves to do their labor, and then basically left us in this condition. Okay? And do that in 2 hours in a way that is convincing for people. Okay? Without having really done much research on their own on this topic. And make it something that leaves them wanting to do more research. That's the challenge of a presentation like this. People will always complain. They'll find something to complain about. He got this little part wrong. He didn't talk about this aspect, which I feel is the most important aspect to cover. He left this out. That proves he's an agent. It's just, people's line of thinking is so ridiculous when it comes to, what they feel is important. And I always tell them the same thing. If you feel something else is more important, by all means, make your own presentation and please deliver it. Put it out on YouTube. You could do that in the comfort of your own home. There's presentation software. You could have that converted right to a video, put your voice right over that, okay? And record it, do a screencast and put it out on YouTube with your voice over it, Don't try to pick holes in somebody else's work. If you think your research is better and it clearly explains a different dynamic or aspect of this whole phenomenon that we're experiencing, by all means, put it out there yourself. And where their work is? Nowhere. You never see these people putting out work of their own. We'll pick this up on the other side. We'll be right back.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey! Teacher, leave them kids alone.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We're going through the Cosmic Abandonment presentation. We were talking about Lloyd Pye's explanation of the 12 ways human beings are not primates. I'm going to be getting to your calls in hopefully the next segment. I'll wrap up this last segment of this hour by continuing the presentation. But if you have anything that you want to discuss, anything that you want to contribute to this conversation on human origins, or any other topic for that matter, never any taboo topics here. The call-in number to join us next segment, next hour, will be 800-313-9443. Once again, calls coming up in the next hour. The call-in number to join us, 800-313-9443. So we were talking about, the different ways human beings are not primates, and we were on bullet point number 8, which was drastically different locomotion. We had covered that and the design of the human foot as compared with the hominid foot. I highly recommend Lloyd Pye's videos for more in-depth discussion of that, and his books as well. Point number 9, human beings are, of course, capable of speech, whereas primates are not. This is a huge difference in our makeup and in our overall capabilities. The human throat is completely redesigned with much greater levels of complexity, and being able to make the fine-tuned small mouth noises that basically are the building blocks of speech, whereas the throat of a primate simply does not have that kind of design, and it doesn't have those fine-tuned capabilities. So that is something that would clearly be a progression in the human being as compared to the primate. And again, I would suggest that that is due to the way that we were engineered, because they needed us to be able to communicate not only with them but with each other. So when they did the genetic manipulation that they did, things like perfectly balanced locomotion may not have been a huge issue, but being able to take direction and be able to communicate with each other to coordinate the direction that they were being given would have been placed very high on the priority list. Okay, so this certainly fits in with a adaptation or an advantage that would have been programmed into us, and therefore supports the interference theory hypothesis. Point number 10, there is no sign in human beings of the typical estrus cycles that are found in primates and many other animals. The estrus cycle is essentially what we commonly know as being in heat, a heat cycle. Okay, so a time period of elevated sexual energy. Okay, so human beings generally do not have anything like that. Certainly not anything to the extent that exists in primates, where they're in heat for a time during often the menstrual cycle in females, and then it subsides after that passes. So the concept of the heat cycle is not found in human beings. That's point number 10. Point number 11, and absolutely these last 2 points are so critical, okay? This to me really proves is the scientific evidence when people decide to take this entire body of research seriously and start to look into it for themselves in a way that is, casting off to the side the typical derision and ridicule that this field of research has been associated with, and start looking at this from a mature perspective. These are the points that are really going to show us where we came from and why we're in the situation that we're in as an entire species, socially and spiritually. And the human genome has within it over 4,000 genetic disorders. That's not the case for any other animal living on this planet. We have more genetic defects in our DNA than any other creature living on the earth. Now, why would that be? Why would it be that just somehow the so-called most advanced creature living on the planet that God gave us dominion over, don't you know, okay, as many religious people believe, but somehow we were built with more genetic defects than any other animal on the planet. Kind of strange and anomalous, don't you think? I mean, why would the creator of the universe, if he was our creator, make us with so many built-in flaws? Oh, is it because we have to be reminded that we're not perfect, like, quote-unquote, he is? You know, in this patriarchal view of God that so many major world religions have? Oh, just like the Old Testament God, you know, which we're going to get into, that whole concept of the Old Testament God, okay? You know, somehow, you know, he had to constantly remind us that you're inferior to me, right? Now, it wouldn't have anything to do with the type of genetic hybridization and splicing and dumbing down and disconnection that was done with our genome to create these things. All of these disorders couldn't have anything to do with that from another intelligent species that completely came in and did a number on humanity. That doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense that the God of creation would have nothing better to do than give us an inferior genome. He's given us something to work out of, right? You know, that's the challenge. We'll start you completely screwed up and see if you could, you know, turn yourself into something that works properly over time, right? You know, we'll give you a chance to work on yourself, to perfect yourself. I mean, you know, the whole creationist idea, again, it's just as childish as the scientists that don't want to look at evidence for what really happened on this planet because of the implications. And once again, it's all because of fear. I can't overstress this enough. All the religious people, all the so-called scientific, but it's scientismic people, okay? I don't know if that's a word, but if it's not, I just coined it, okay? The people who are worshipers at the altar of scientism, just like people who are the worshipers at the altar of cultural religions of any type, no matter where they're located geographically or, you know, what God they, you know, believe in. It's a child's mentality. It is a childlike mentality that doesn't want to look at the hard questions. Okay? What put 4,000 plus genetic defects in the human genome? Try to wrestle with that question and its implications. So does nature just do that? Oh, these are just random mutations. That's what? That's natural selection? That's how natural selection works? I thought natural selection selected the best from what was inferior. You know, but somehow it created 4,000 genetic disorders in our genome. You know, I mean, that's what Darwinists would have you believe. And creationists would have you believe God did this. For what purpose? To torment us? Or, you know, or just to remind you we're not as good as he, quote, he is. It's always a male God, you know. It's never a force. It's never some entity that is neuter or has no sex. It's always male, you know, in all the major cultural religions. You know, this is the thing that I think Pi's work really, it hit me like a oncoming freight train. You know, when I first started looking into his work, and he explained how these beings that were doing this genetic manipulation didn't care about what they were creating. They were going to use it as a tool and then cast it off, or be out of here and leave us to our own devices, which is essentially what I think they did, with some caveats. I don't think they just took off and there was no connection left, which we'll get into. But I'm going to leave the presentation there for this evening, and we're going to go to the phones on the other side of the break. We'll pick this up, the presentation, next week.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
Welcome back, everyone. We're into the third hour of tonight's broadcast on this edition of What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. So I'm going to leave the presentation right there. We were on slide number 93 or 94, whichever way you want to look at it. We're going to move on to talk about the 4,000 plus genetic disorders in the human genome and how our number of chromosomes came to be the way that it is. This was already hinted at in the story of the past that we went over several weeks ago about the story of the non-human entities that came to this planet and performed the genetic manipulation that they did. But we'll get into some scientific evidence for this theory on next week's show regarding the human chromosome number 2 and how the genetic manipulation that was done could have not only created all these 4,000 genetic disorders, but that one of them may have been primary psychopathy in the human species. So that'll be coming up next week, and we'll go into other areas like how religions came about, how governments came about, how the worship of money and gold came about. All kinds of fun stuff to come about this story of interference with our natural evolutionary progression as a species, as spiritual beings in the physical world, having an experience here to learn and grow, and how that's been hijacked in our species. So for now, for the remainder of the show, I'm going to take your calls. The call-in number to join us is 800-313-9443. So let's go to the phones. Any comments on this entire topic are welcome. Anything that you want to add, anything you want to bring to my attention, any questions that you have, or if you want to go off into completely other areas, that's fine as well. So here we go. Let's hear from Phil in Oregon. Phil, you're live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. All right. First of all, Mark, thank you from everybody who gives a damn. Thank you for your enunciation alone in your direct presentation style. And what else? Damn it. Lost what I was going to say. That in your minimal use of profanity so you can reach more people, it's exquisite. I mean, you're brilliant, dude. Thank you so much. I mean, you did all the hard work on yourself so you can help others. And I mean, thank you so much, dude. Seriously,
I appreciate that. It is a lot of hard work, and that continues even after you work on yourself. Really, that's when the hard work begins, because then you have to attempt to take information that is transformative to other people, and that is what is known as the true great work. So I thank you for your gratitude in that regard, and I'm going to do my best to continue that and refine it even more.
Same here, man. I'd take 1,000 bullets for you, brother. This is good stuff. Anyway, I remember you talking about people saying this whole alien perspective thing is, oh, this is bad, this is terrible, there's no hope. But for me, when you say that stuff, this is totally uplifting. I mean, this is empowering, because then it gives you such a higher perspective. And you can be like, oh, Johnny hocked a loogie in my chocolate milk. Those trivial issues go out the window, and then you can, take these bigger issues on board without, brush it off your shoulders.
That's right. And what it really comes down to when you boil it all down is, would you rather know or would you rather remain ignorant? Even if the truth is ugly, doesn't knowing it put you in a more empowered position than when you were ignorant of it?
Exactly.
I mean, it could be difficult for newcomers. It could be difficult for people that haven't yet gotten a very wide historical perspective of what's really going on here on this planet as far as the control system aspects are concerned. But I think, again, I stated as a caveat for going into this material, this is like for the mature class. This is like the AP class, okay? It's like this, you have to understand this material after you understand the control system, because this explains how the control system got to be the way that it is. And it helps us to understand why we're so susceptible to this control system due to our programming that is embedded in our makeup. Now, what I want to do later on is give people something to not be depressed about, but to have a little bit of dare I use the term hope, okay? I don't want to put people on the hopium drug either, okay? I want to give them a mature, realistic perspective. There is something that goes beyond all this genetic manipulation, and that is epigenetics. The realm of consciousness can trump any of the things that have been done to us, and that's directed by the human will and the human heart. And once you have aligned those forces, and you want to use those to propagate truth and freedom and higher level consciousness and love, no force in the universe can stop that.
That's right. I totally agree. I mean, look at these psychopaths. They don't have the genetic potential capacity for love and empathy, and they're falling apart. They don't even mix their genetics with any other people. They're kind of like dogs in a way. They don't have mutts are stronger. They mix the bloods up, and
they're actually creating more problems within their own bloodlines because they have this totally psychopathic desire to keep these traits, quote unquote, in the family, and it's not strengthening them; it's actually weakening them. It's actually a disadvantage. Their system is slowly falling apart, but it's going to take a whole lot more focused concentration toward knowledge and willpower and true care on people's part to really move us forward collectively, because we're just not there in numbers yet. But there's a small growing segment, a core segment of people who are really getting it, and they're going to take this information to other people in a more concentrated, focused, and distributed way as the years move on, for sure.
Right. But we were chatting in your chat room area about natural law and how that ties in with these psychotic, they're kind of like, virus people, whatever you call them, how the natives took care of it. They just push them off the ice shelf or go hunting and they disappear,
Right.
Is that proper in natural law, since they initiated the violence with all this, the spiritual warfare on every level, food, air, water, thought, are we have the right to
I would say once violence is demonstrated and there's no effort on the part of the person who has conducted the violence to change their ways, or perhaps in the case with primary psychopaths, there's no capacity to change that, there is a natural defensive aspect of natural law that states that you can deal with that in a physical manner. And, I'm not telling anybody to just go identify a psychopath and take them out of existence. I'm saying that at some point humanity as a whole has to understand that we have the right to deal with the beings that would dare to take our rights away, physically, if required to do that, if they will not back down and allow us to exercise our natural rights and be free. At some point, your freedom has to be taken. If it's attempted to be taken by someone else, you have a right to physically take it back. I don't know how much more clear I could be about that regarding where I stand regarding that dynamic. But it's certainly not the New Age idea of just let everybody who's doing evil run rampant because we think they could all be, reformed in some way with words, because it's just not true. I mean, from a mature perspective looking at it, okay, you can mitigate that to a very huge extent in consciousness, but there's still going to be people who are going to act out in a violent way. Until we actually identify where psychopathy really comes from in the genome and possibly develop a way of dealing with that in the genome itself, or until we become so conscious and we mitigate that to such an extent that is actually worked out epigenetically out of the genome. Okay? Until that is no longer in the human genome, we're going to be dealing with that dynamic, and I say there is always an inherent right to deal with it physically. So that's my answer to that question. Really great points, Phil. Thanks so much for the call. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue with your calls on the other side. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We're taking your calls in this hour. The toll-free number to join us, 800-313-9443. Let's hear from Lynn in Washington. Lynn, you're live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hi, Mark. First of all, I would like to echo the other caller. I'm thoroughly enjoying your presentation, and I'm finding it very enlightening and very confirming. The other thing is I would like you to spell Brian Forrester's name. As I recall, he's got an interesting spelling of his last name.
I think it is Forester, Forrester. I'm not 100% positive, but I think that's what it is. Let me just see if I can bring it up and confirm that.
That sounds correct. But
yeah, I'm sorry, that is not correct. It's Foerster, Brian Forrester, Foerster.
Yeah, I thought it had an unusual last or spelling, and I thought if people were going to look him up, it might be wise to give out the proper spelling of his name. Yeah,
if you look up Brian Forrester and elongated skulls, you'll find the correct gentleman, or Brian Forrester and Nephilim architecture, you'll find the correct Brian Forrester on YouTube. If you just type Brian Forrester and ancient architecture in YouTube, something like that, you will come to his videos.
I had the good fortune years ago, back in the late 90s, of going to a presentation of Lloyd Pies.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was awesome. I really didn't even know what I was getting myself into when I went to this meeting. And he just blew me away. Something that has got me puzzled, however, in the question that I want to ask.
Sure.
We're talking about the difference between humans and primates and the chromosomes and all this, but we're also talking about 85% of the population of the world has got the Rh factor in their blood.
Right.
Which is a rhesus chromosome.
Right.
If I'm correct. There are 15% of the entire population on the planet that don't have that.
Correct.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, my take on the whole Rh factor, positive or negative, whether we have the rhesus factor in our genome, is that I think if it's present, we probably have more of the genetics that were present in the original human beings, or the original beings, regardless of what you want to call them, that were naturally evolving on this planet. I think that is the hominid aspect to us. But then, that factor, I think, being removed in a small percent of the population is part of the non-human essence. Now, I'm not trying to say that people that have Rh negative blood are non-human. I'm saying that this other presence that came here and interbred with us didn't have that in their blood. And what happened was, over time, they introduced their genetics into our bloodlines, and some of those what you might call a recessive trait, the absence of that trait, propagated in certain bloodlines. And that's why most bloodlines that are of quote unquote royal origin, or blue blood, or you could say the ruling bloodlines, largely have this Rh negative aspect, and people have made a lot about this, have talked about this quite extensively. I tend to not think that just this one factor is the most important thing to look at when it comes to this, but it does play into it a little bit, and so I'm glad that you basically brought it up and mentioned it. I think it's essentially a sign of the Rh positive aspect, I feel, means that we have a little bit more of a connection to the original lineage of what was developing on this planet than an infusion of what you might call Nephilim DNA or Anunnaki DNA, or just simply whatever you want to call them, regardless of the culture that talked about them and gave them a name, of the non-human entities that came here in the ancient past. So,
may I interrupt
Sure.
for a moment? I have known for a long time that I'm Rh negative, and I'm certainly not royal.
Right. No, absolutely not. So what I'm saying is that these bloodlines interbred with all of humanity. It's like they didn't just purely keep their blood constantly in their lineage. Obviously, it leaked over into the rest of the population, and now, like you said, probably over 15% of humanity has that factor within their blood. So it's not something that has anything to do with the level of consciousness that a person is going to be at or can reach. We have integrated it into our whole genetic pool, so to speak.
What little bit of research I've been able to find on this as I was looking it up is there's a whole bunch of people with the Rh negative that seem to have a lot of interactions with an alien presence,
Yes.
or something that's beyond us.
Yes.
I've had all kinds of experiences that if I sat and told somebody, they wouldn't believe them.
Oh, you're absolutely right there. When it comes to that, there is a absolute correlation and connection between the interaction of people, of human beings with non-human entities, and the Rh negative factor in human blood. Without any doubt in my mind, there is an absolute correlation there, because the percentages of people that have had abduction-related experiences, or even very strange encounters of some type with non-human entities, and the percent of them that have the Rh negative factor is just, compared to how much of the whole percentage of the human population have it, is absolutely off the charts. So there's certainly a correlation there, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, Lynn.
I would like to know if there's more information on that aspect of it that I can look up then.
Well, I would say maybe, get involved with a UFO research group in your area. I know that this is a topic that comes up on occasion at the Philadelphia UFO meetup group that's headed up by Chris Augustine. You might want to check out his website. It's aliensthetruth.com. That's a resource I can throw out there just right off the top of my head for you to check out. I'm not sure if he has any articles up on the site about that, but perhaps maybe you can get in touch with him and ask him if he has any other information on that, because I know it's one of the topics that he personally looks into and talks about often at the meetups.
And that was
aliensthetruth.com.
Aliens the Truth. Okay.
Just a shout out there for Chris. And Chris was the host of my Cosmic Abandonment presentation. He runs the Philadelphia UFO meetup group, so he kind of gave me the opportunity to present this information, in a formal setting for the first time.
Well, I appreciate your information. I really do. That's very helpful to me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, and thanks for the great insights on the call.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's see. Let me see how much time we have left in this segment. Okay, let's go to Scott in Portland. Scott, you're live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. A couple things, and I'll try to make it quick, but I have some... by the way, I'm a big fan of your show.
Thank you.
I want to put that out first. However, I do disagree with you on some things.
Well, that's okay. No one has to agree with it all. It's all about, putting the topics out there for a discussion, putting them out on the table. You stay on the line through the break, and I'll let you get to your point on the other side, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We'll be right back.
Sleep.
back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We're taking your calls in this hour. The toll-free number to join us, 800-313-9443. Okay, I believe we were talking to Scott in Portland. And I'm not sure why the break music is continuing. If the producer is there, perhaps he could take care of that. He was supposed to duck back out when I started talking again, but apparently it is not. We may just have to let it ride out. Looks like the automation on the network end failed there. There we go. They took care of it. Okay, sorry about that little glitch there, folks. We were talking to Scott in Portland just before the break hit us. Scott, are you still on the line with us?
I'm still here, yeah.
Okay.
Just a heads up, my phone is about to die soon, so we may get cut off.
No worries. You go right ahead and get to your point.
Yes, great. Platonism. And the idea I'm talking about that all the forms. Well, let me back up a second. I've long been concerned with assumptions people make and have inherited, and they become unexamined assumptions.
Sure.
And one of these is the idea that there are the forms in the mind of God of the foxes. There's somewhere in the mind of God a fox, a bird, a worm, and all those things will regenerate themselves. And this is long. I don't see any proof for this, and I think it's long been part of the problem that's been the war on nature, as I see it.
Sure. Yeah.
And coming from, I have a pretty diverse background and stuff, and the brought up hardcore Christian, it was about 7th or 8th grade the first time I think I smoked marijuana, and thereabouts that time that I realized some things were really wrong. And most of it has to do with what I would call the right hand not telling the left hand what it's doing.
Compartmentalization, sure.
Yeah, especially with people who are in authority and to justify their authority. And a lot of this seems to be justified by this idea that you can't really ruin anything. And we're definitely not a spinning rock in outer space where infinite possibilities can happen.
That's right.
There's a certain regimen of... So...
What you're describing here is an attachment in people's minds to the idea of permanence. Like it's always been this way, it is this way now, and it's always going to continue to be this way. I find that you see this embedded in the most brainwashed and controlled people, and you see this embedded deeply in people who believe that the control system is absolutely impenetrable and eternal. They're resigned to the idea that government must always exist. Controllers must always exist. This is somehow embedded in the fabric of nature itself, these people believe. They're so convinced that the current system is eternal. And what it really comes down to is these people believe that this system is God. They think that it's God, or that it's God that is doing this, one or the other.
Their insane fear.
Yeah.
They have fears that, and I know this because my family are people that I grew up with that consider themselves to be elites, and what I would call the kind of people that Alex Jones spends all day attacking. And I'm not going to defend them, but I'm going to say that the situation is a lot more complicated, and in my opinion, has to do with thousands of years of people believing lies.
Sure.
Things like Platonism, and maybe they're not outright lies, but the whole angle of looking at things in a conspiratorial point of view, I think, has its advantages, because people do advocate these lies day in and day out for their own beneficial reason.
That's
now,
right. And evolution is most certainly one of them that was played off by some of the elites like the Galton families and the eugenicists and social engineers of the day and propagated out to the masses to get them to buy into the whole supremacy of matter hypothesis and the whole genes permanently control your destiny. So the lot that you're dealt with in life is the lot that you're stuck with. And it's certainly not true because we know differently through the science of epigenetics and the understanding that consciousness and the way that we inform ourselves and our body through what we put into it, information-wise and nutrition-wise, can actually change the receptors that activate genes or don't activate certain genes. We're ultimately in control of that because we can reprogram ourselves. And that's the good news when it comes to all this. Like I said, no matter how much genetic programming or manipulation has been done, it can never trump the power of consciousness. The power of consciousness is always going to be able to trump that. Yes.
Free will is fact, and no matter how hard you try to get rid of your free will, you're going to suffer the pain of how it hurts when, I don't know, there's a certain pain and punishment that comes along with people who pretend they don't have any free will, and I don't pity them for it. Because that's part of the fact that makes everything that we know, sorry about the sound here, that we know is basically beautiful and it has properties of infinity diversity built in, which is nature.
That's right.
And these things have evolved over millions of years to become the foxes and the birds and the porcupines and the fish and things that when you're 3 years old and you see the mother fish or whatever defending it, you immediately feel joy as that would be a life worth living.
Right.
Now, living as a human in some kind of circuitry box and in outer space doesn't sound good to me. I really think what we have here is the best of possible worlds in some sense. And
sure. Yeah, we have to formulate that connection to our real roots, our real ancestry. I think, that's underlying all of this manipulation and all of this underlying programming that's been done to us. There's still that connection deep down underneath to our true nature that can never be completely buried. And they think they can do that, but ultimately, really, they're kidding themselves because they're never going to be able to bury the true human soul. They're never going to be able to bury truth.
I would disagree with you a little bit that I agree that the conspiratorial frame to put this in is very important because people are guilty, but the truth is they're not in control of anything. What they're in control of is the runaway sorcerer's apprentice who's making a mess out of everything, and they just want to pretend they're in control of something that's impossible to control.
Yeah, at some level, I would.
Works is anarchism.
At some level, I would agree that they're not ultimately really in control because ultimately natural law is the only thing that's really in control. They think they're going to trump that, but it cannot be. That cannot be done. Again, that's the ultimate lesson in all of this, is that it's always reigning over everything else in this universe. We can only be under the illusion that we can conquer the laws of nature that are ultimately put into effect by the creator of the universe. That doesn't mean we don't have free will. We still do. We have free will to operate our lives within the boundary conditions or guidelines of morality as set by natural law. And if we do that, then our evolutionary progression continues forward. If we don't do that, it stagnates or regresses. So I think you're making a very good point. I don't really see too much contradiction in how we think and along those lines.
Your show every week, man. You're usually on spot, and the whole. I honestly will. It doesn't really seem like. I guess what I'm trying to say is the alien DNA or whatever, in proper sense, should be considered. We're all part of one universe here,
sure.
And so whatever kind of mutations happened, there's too much infinity for people to consider it as something besides what we have here, which is who knows? Okay.
Yeah. See, I agree with that. It's not about purging or totally alienating this, which is why I don't even really like the word alien. And you notice I very rarely use it. I call it just extraterrestrial, meaning not of the Earth, but from another planet or another dimension or another galaxy, who knows. But this is about integration and healing. Ultimately, it's about reconciliation when it all comes down to it, and realizing that we are all one and we are all on the same basic path of development. Great insight, Scott. We'll pick this up on the other side. Stay with us, folks.
There's a code of silence that we don't dare speak. There's a wall between us in a river so deep. We keep pretending that there's nothing wrong. There's a code of silence and it can't go on.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Republic Broadcasting. Last segment of the show for this evening. The time really does fly. Let's continue with your calls. Let's hear from Ryan in Nebraska. Ryan, you're live on What on Earth is Happening. Welcome.
Hey, Mark. I am on episode 10 right now.
Okay.
My wife and I, and we're looking at barriers to self-realization.
Yes.
And we've realized that we're really stuck, in a lot of our, in a lot of the barriers. But one of the things you said was that it takes will.
Yes.
And I just, if you could expand on that for me, that would be great.
Sure. The will is the ordering force within creation. It is what is known as the centropic force that actually pushes evolutionary progress in consciousness forward. Okay? Unless you get in touch with that underlying force that is present not only in yourself, but it is present in all of nature, in everything in creation. It is the will of creation. It is the force that is actually the will of creation. What creation is trying to will into effect and wants. It has a desire. It wants to progress in its own understanding. It wants to progress in its own complexity. It wants to progress in its own knowledge of itself. Okay? And what the human being's will, lowercase w, needs to align with is that greater force of will, capital W. When you align those things and there's no contradiction between those two seemingly different concepts of will, okay? One you could look at as the desire of the self on a lower level, the individuated self, and one you could look at as the desire of all creation, okay? When you actually align those two, the force that is actually underlying in nature, that is there and moving all of the entire universe forward, actually works with you. You could say it the opposite way. You could say you work with it. You're no longer trying to buck that force. You are actually stepping into the slipstream of that force by aligning yourself to that force. Okay? And when you do that, that's creates total self-empowerment. You're no longer actually working against yourself. You're no longer acting as your own enemy in this world when you align yourself to that force. Understanding what it is the first thing. To understand that we are here for a purpose, and that purpose is to learn and grow in consciousness. When you understand that, that's the first step towards starting to align your will with that higher capital W will, okay, that is inherent in nature. And again, that's desire. It's part of care. It's care for truth. It's care for what is right. It's care for development of knowledge. You know, if you've already started along that path, that care is present. So there's a certain amount of will present. Now you have to nurture it and work with it and be persistent. See, that's where, we look at will as only something like that. Do you have the will to get through this? Do you have the will to do this? It's more than even just persistence. It's persistence and care aligned together. So there's a feminine and a masculine component within that higher will that we have to develop. That's really what I would consider, true will, or what has been called in, other occult systems or other transformational systems. It has been referred to as thelema, which is the word for will in the ancient Greek language. I hope that explains what I consider the true will to be.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thank you so much for your work, too.
Sure. And like I said, the more you look into this information and the more you continue to nurture the desire to move forward in your own evolutionary progress and consciousness, the more of that will you will build up within yourself, and the more you'll align yourself to that underlying force in nature, which is what I've called the syntropic force, or in other words, the ordering force that counters the force of entropy or chaos in this world and actually orders things toward more complexity, more understanding, more knowledge, more care, more morality, more growth and development in consciousness. The more you do that, the smoother that process becomes. So I just from what you've said here tonight, that you're looking into this and you want to go further, I could tell you're already on that path. So keep that up and just keep moving forward.
All right. I had one other thing I wanted to ask you.
Go right ahead.
Seeing how I'm listening to stuff from 2010, it's now 2014.
Yes.
In 2010, you seemed a bit pessimistic, and you just continually are saying, the path we're headed down is just we're going to go fall deeper into the system of control. Has your opinion changed on that at all?
Not drastically. I don't think we're anywhere near a number to facilitate a quantum shift in our what we're creating in our reality. We're not even anywhere close to that number. And I don't say that, please don't take that as just total negativity. I don't say that because I'm trying to discourage anybody. I'm saying that because I'm trying to be honest and answer the person's question as I see things. Okay? I don't see things turning around. I look out the door and I see 100% totally unconscious human beings everywhere, all around me, in massive, massive droves. And I'm telling you, it is a numbers thing. This is another thing the New Age movement has wrong. Okay? Epigenetics and consciousness works through numbers. It works through amount of people. It does this whole thing, this whole lie about it only takes a very small number of people to push consciousness into a transformation is a lie. It takes numbers of people to do that, because the more people that think the opposite way, they're people who are trying to counteract that dynamic of actually moving forward in consciousness. And the reason that consciousness hasn't moved past where it's at is because too many people are unconscious and holding it back. I mean, it's just it's an absolute physics numbers game. To move a mass, you need a certain amount of force to move it. And that's just how it works. And it works the same way in consciousness, just like it does in the physical domain. We're nowhere near that amount. And I'm just being honest. So can we get to that? Yes, absolutely we can. But see, possibility is there. The question is, do we will that to happen? How many people are truly stepping into that alignment with the higher will? Do I see a lot of people doing that? No. Do I see some people doing it? Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't even bother to continue doing it if I didn't see the possibility is there. Can it be changed? Yes, it can be changed. Still, at this late hour, I feel it can be changed. Do I feel we're well on the way to doing that? Not even close. We have to exert so much more willpower, so much more effort, so much more persistence. We have to develop so much more care for truth and freedom, and completely unlearn what we have supposedly learned and we're holding on to, and it's completely wrong information. And that's what I call negative knowledge. We're not even in a place of any knowledge. We're in a place where we have no knowledge and we're still stuck on negative beliefs that aren't true. You know, we have to move so far past that dynamic that it's scarcely conceivable where we're at to where we need to get to. You know, and I'm just being honest, and you should not take that as a discouragement. You should continue to move forward in your understanding, even knowing that that's my position even now. You know, I'm just one person, and that's my position, that's my opinion, that's where I see it right now. I have to concede, could I be wrong? Sure. But from an educated guest perspective, I have to tell you, humanity is nowhere near solving the problems that we are up against when it comes to our freedom being destroyed. And if we want to solve that problem, we have to learn the truth, we have to step into that dynamic, and we have to exercise a whole lot more will and persistence to change. And I think that's only being done in a very tiny fraction of human beings right now. Can that change in the future? It absolutely can change. And I think more people are coming online to it, but still too slowly. I would like to see it increase and speed up and expand dynamically, but that's up to everybody out there listening and spreading this information to others, and how effectively we're going to do that, and how persistently we're going to do that. So really, really great questions there, Ryan. I want to thank you so much for the call. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this edition of What on Earth is Happening. We'll see you right here next week.